Okay, before we start, because I think I can hear some parents coming up. Before we start, anyone have any questions just to start us off? Questions? Okay, I think we'll start because we can't wait too long, and it is getting tiring for everyone. So inshallah, I'll start now, and then if parents do come along, they'll join in, inshallah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wal aqibatu lil muttaqeen, was salatu was salamu ala rasulihil kareem, amma ba'd. Okay, so we started in December 2014. Okay? And when we started, this was something 4 points that we had in mind when we started our madrasa, okay? And for many reasons, which I'll hopefully go through briefly as well. So our pedagogy. So pedagogy means the method of teaching, the style of teaching. That's what pedagogy is. And teaching methodology will be formulated around 4 things. And I remember saying this in this room in December 2014. There were about, I think, 60 parents sitting here, and I wanted to go through this again, just so that we can look at our journey that we're taking now. So, an experience-based education which caters for the individual needs of pupils and thrives on their unique learning skills. So we want it to be experience-based. The reason why experience-based, there's a philosopher called John Dewey. Okay? Now he talks about experience as at the core of education. So when we talk about experience, we're talking about students, when they say 18 years old, 19, 20, when they look back at their Islamic experience they've had, that should inform their future education about Islam. And the reason why I'm saying that is because, and it links to point number 3 as well, and I'll mention a quick anecdote or story with point number 3. The second point was our method needs to be holistic. Now, what that means in this context is that, we can't just say, okay, let's teach fiqh today, let's talk about wudu, or let's talk about salah. What we're going to do is incorporate all the other sciences within Islam. So when we teach wudu, for instance, we're not just going to teach the fiqh aspect, we're going to teach the spiritual side of wudu. So for instance, the hadith of Prophet ﷺ, when he describes when you're washing your hands, how the sins that the hands have committed, they are washed away until they reach, they come out the tips of the fingers. So Prophet ﷺ has described it in that manner. So it's got to be holistic. So for instance, I remember one of the lessons we had, we taught wudu, taught how to do it, the fiqh side, taught the spiritual side. Then we spoke about the hadith of Prophet ﷺ when he came to a companion and he said to him, that look, and he saw him doing wudu, he said, look, you're wasting water. And the companion said, is there wastage in water, in wudu as well? So Prophet ﷺ said, yes. Okay? Even if you are at a flowing stream, even then you cannot waste water. You have to use that much amount which is sufficient for you. So based on that, we got in touch with Hamid and we looked at environment, the issues of environment, and how Prophet ﷺ, through his teachings, today what we see as merely fiqh, through his teachings, it actually has an impact throughout the whole world. So that's how we're trying to look at it. Okay? So that's what we mean by holistic. And our pedagogy has to be one which works towards keeping the hearts and minds of Muslim children open for Islam and the maktab after they leave the maktab. Now, can you see how pessimistic this sounds? Okay? That our aim is to make sure that by the time the children leave, their hearts remain open for Islam. It should actually be, the love of Islam is created in their hearts. But because we live in a context which is very secularized, always against religion, and specifically out of all the religions, it's Islam that is ridiculed the most. So that's why we have to take this approach. That look, what we have to guarantee at least is that by the time children leave, at least their hearts remain open towards Islam. Lastly, the curriculum should be made relevant to students of the modern age. Okay? Now, I did mention that when it comes to hearts and minds, I remember a lot of the philosophy that we're coming up with also is related to a lot of the philosophies. So Muslim philosophies, Western philosophies, but also life experiences. Okay, our philosophy is not all anecdotal, but we do add in stories. So, for instance, when I was going to study in Darul Uloom, I remember I was late once and I had to go by myself. So I had to take a train all the way up to Yorkshire, and then I had to get a taxi from Leeds to Dewsbury. Now, at that time I had this really big book which I was given as a gift from a brother from Al-Bir Foundation, because he was giving free books. And I got this, it was basically all the 6 books of hadith all in one. So you can imagine it was about this big and this thick. So I sat with that in the back seat of the taxi. Now the Muslim brother who was the driver, he came out of the car and he started going around and then looking in and then going around and looking in, and he kept on doing that. So I had to open the door and say, look, what's wrong, what's the problem? And he wasn't opening up. It took me a bit of time to calm him down and then speak to him. And then he told me that when he was in a madrasa, okay, he had been abused, okay, physically abused. And as a result of that, whenever he sees someone with a beard and lots of books and stuff, he gets agitated, he gets he becomes anxious. So there are students who are coming out of some madrasas. I know that's an extreme example. That is an extreme example, but we hear these stories often, quite often. So that's where some of this is coming from, especially point number 3. It seems pessimistic, but it's there because of what's going on outside. And coming back to this point, when I was being a teacher, I was doing my PGCE, and I remember we had to do, we had to take out a week for different schools as an experience. And when I spoke to students there, I used to always ask them, what do you prefer, coming to school or going to your local madrasa or your mosque? And I think it was 100% said school. Okay? So that's another thing, things like that. Yes, philosophy is there, the theory is there, but we want to interlink it with our children's experiences today in Britain. Okay, so that was 2 years ago. So now what we've come up with is something more, something that's more inclusive and more holistic. So now what we're saying is we are an academy which specializes in facilitating the cultural, so it's not just Islamic, but we're trying to push the cultural side as well. The experiential, conscientious, so making students think for themselves. Okay? So when they are going to the toilet, for instance, the parent doesn't have to remind them. They stop and they remember that Allah is watching them, and they make that dua. Even doing things with the right hand. What our children have to be thinking, what we have to be thinking is, this is directly linked to our spiritual aspect. Using the right hand, what we're ultimately saying is, I'm using my right hand because I know Allah is watching me. Yeah? I am eating with my right hand because I know Allah is watching me, and it's a sunnah of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yeah? So this is what we mean by conscientious at all times. Critical, it's very important to be critical. I'll explain why afterwards as well. And creative, and I'll touch upon this later. Growth of children through to their later teens by means of a holistic pedagogy infused with a synthesizing. Now this is important for our parents to understand, that what we're doing here, it's synthesizing of traditional and contemporary ideas in order for them to have a well-rounded Islamic worldview. Now, there's 2 things. There's the traditional and contemporary. By traditional, obviously we're talking about the past. We cannot let go of our past because it's pretty much part of our identity. But at the same time, we cannot remain in the past. We must move ahead. But it's about bringing those together in the most creative ways. And that's why we're saying we're going to synthesize our traditional, our past, with the contemporary ideas, contemporary issues that are taking place. And that's basically what our madrasa is now heading towards. That's the direction we want to take, for instance. Okay, now, I did very quickly, very briefly, because I'm a student of history, alongside philosophy and theology. So I wanted to very quickly talk about this person here. Anyone know who this might be? Yeah, his name is too small to be read from there. Oh, you can actually. Ibn Khaldun. Okay? Ibn Khaldun was one of the most famous Muslim historians from the 14th century. So going back 600 years, 600 to 700 years. Ibn Khaldun has also been believed to be the father of sociology. Okay? Some scholars say that the whole aspect of sociology began with Ibn Khaldun. his book I would definitely recommend. If you can't, I mean, it's a very, very big book, the Muqaddimah. If you can't read all of it, even bits of it, it's all online as well, and you can buy it very cheaply from Amazon. One aspect that I wanted to focus on, and I'll also let you know about the Muqaddimah. I had to study this in my undergraduate degree when I was doing BA, and also when I did my masters, we had to look at the Muqaddimah. So that's how important it is seen by academics as well. So one aspect, and I'll finish off with Ibn Khaldun here. One of the things about Ibn Khaldun is he talks about the rise and fall of Muslim empires. Okay? So all the Muslim empires, how they rose, how they went up. And he talks about, for instance, the Arabs when they were, Bedouins when they were in the deserts, the hardship that they went through, the struggle that they had, enabled them to reach such heights. But when those same desert dwellers went into urban society, went into the cities and had their castles and their palaces, and all those luxuries that were put forward to them, as a result of that, they began to go down. Yeah? And I think Iqbal sums it up very well. Hopefully I'll remember. He says, "Ah, tujhko bataun mein taqdeer umam kya hai?" He says, let me tell you what the destiny of nations has been. Right? Shamshir sana awwal ta'us rubab akhir. He says, the destiny of nations is that they rise in the shadow of the swords, through struggle and strife. But then they fall in the shadow of musical instruments, right, through the rubab and those guitars. And because what he is also saying is basically summarizing Ibn Khaldun. It's when we go through hardships and difficulties, we go up. When we kind of leave that focus on luxuries, that's our downfall. And there's another poet who says, "Jabal juhd ke piche khuda hai, jo chahe usse mile," which means that behind the mountain of sacrifice is Allah. Whoever wants to climb that mountain, you will meet him there, you will find him there. Okay. So coming back to Muqaddimah, so he's talking about the rise and fall of nations. As part of his book, he talks about 4 different styles of education that will take place. And I find this very interesting because I want to look at that and put our madrasa in the context of Ibn Khaldun's different methods of education. So, do you have a hand up? Or did you have a question? Okay. If anyone does have a question, you can always put your hand up, inshallah. So, just want to quickly show you a map. Ibn Khaldun was around here. If you look, that's modern day Spain, that's Morocco, then the other countries are here, Tunisia, etc. So Ibn Khaldun was around the 14th, 15th century. Okay? And that's around the time when Muslims are being thrown out of Spain. So Muslims were here for a long time, and it's kind of the downfall of Muslims in Al-Andalus. And I think that's one of the things that Ibn Khaldun is struck by, the kind of downfall of Muslims in Granada and in Al-Andalus. And in his book, he talks about the education system that was there in Al-Andalus, talks about the education in Al-Maghrib, Morocco, talks about it in Ifriqiya, so Tunisia, etc. And then also the East. And he talks about the different things that go on. I'm going to very quickly run through this and then talk about why I wanted to show you this. Okay? So, he says that, and I've really summarized it from his book, he says in Andalus, instruction is given in reading and writing. Okay? I should have given this right at the end. Okay? But, look, imagine, Andalus is basically Muslims in the West. Okay? So when Muslims first came to the West, how did they teach their children in madrasas? And what we're doing and how we're kind of dealing with it. So instruction in reading and writing, what that means is, in their madrasas, they were teaching language. Okay? They were teaching children how to not just read the Quran, but to read, for instance, Arabic at the time, to be able to write Arabic, which was the lingua franca of the time. To the extent, I don't know if anyone's heard of Moses Maimonides. Okay? He was a Jewish philosopher, and the Jews, he's like he's one of the greatest scholars the Jews have had. His actual Arabic name was Musa ibn Maymun. Okay? When he wrote his book, he wrote it in Arabic text, but in Hebrew. So that's how much Arabic was the lingua franca at the time. So that even if you're talking in Hebrew, you'll be using Arabic as your text. And however, this is Ibn Khaldun speaking. He says, however, since the Quran is the basis and foundation, Muslims do stress the Quran, and that's what's happening here. We do stress upon the Quran the most. But should that be the only stressing point? That's the question we will have later on. So they teach reading and writing, they teach how to recite the Quran. They also teach poetry, composition, and expert knowledge of Arabic and good handwriting. So it's not just, there's a difference between writing and a difference between good handwriting. When you go to Al-Andalus and you go to the mosque, you will see the beauty, the art that's taking place there, because that's where the education system begins. Okay? They do not stress teaching of the Quran more than other subjects. This is something that Ibn Khaldun noted as a historian about Andalus, that they do teach the Quran, yes, but do they give it preference over everything else? No, they put everything in balance. In fact, they are more concerned with teaching handwriting than any other subject until the child reaches manhood, and then they do more Islam, because then they think, okay, the person's ready. Okay, they're ready for this. So that's Al-Andalus. Keep that in mind. Let's move over to Maghrib, today's Morocco. So they restrict the education of children to instruction in the Quran. So imagine, I'm just trying to give you a little tour of, we've done the tour of madrasas, so you've walked inside the a madrasa in Andalus, now you're walking inside a madrasa in Maghrib, in Morocco. So what you would find there is the instruction of the Quran being taught. Okay? The Maghribis do not bring up any other subject in their classes. So if you were to go in, you wouldn't find poetry, reading, writing, you wouldn't find other sciences, you would find students sitting and reading the Quran. Okay? Such as, you won't find any of these subjects until the student learns how to read the Quran. Now if a student drops out halfway, that's it. You won't learn anything else. So if you're able to recite the Quran, understand the Quran, only then you move on. But a lot used to drop halfway, so they wouldn't be as educated, for instance, in Al-Andalus, as they would be in Andalus. They know, now this is interesting, and this tradition is still alive today in Morocco. Yeah? That they use it, that when it comes to the Quran, they are very, very, very good at reciting the Quran. If you go to certain mosques, they sit down and recite in a certain kind of dialect. Okay? So they know the orthography of the Quran, as in the recitation, and they know it by heart. And even today, Morocco is quite famous for the hifz, okay? Because they don't give you a Quran, they give you like a slate. You write the Quran, the teacher comes into the classroom, he reads out loud. I think it's a follow on from this. Teacher reads out the Quran, students write it down on their blackboards. Okay? And then they keep that for the entire day. And then next day teacher comes in, they rub it off, and they write the new one, and it gets, they memorize it in that way. And interesting, just when it comes to fidget spinners, I just remembered, what the students have to do, as they're memorizing the Quran, they are given something to fidget with. Okay? So, their mind is working in one way, and they're fidgeting on something else. It's one of the ways of, doing good at hifz. And it's quite famous, because Moroccans are well known for the hifz aspect. Okay, people of Ifriqiya, by Ifriqiya we mean Tunisia, Egypt, along those sides. What they used to do, now this historian, Ibn Khaldun, he's travelled a lot, he's travelled far and wide. He's observed people, he's observed empires, he's observed, educations, and he, takes us on a journey. And he says that the people of Ifriqiya combine instruction of children in Quran and Hadith. Can you see the slight difference? We're coming closer to Hadith here as well now. That in Ifriqiya, students are being taught the Quran and the Hadith alongside it. Okay. Also, they teach basic science. They used to teach science in the classroom alongside the Quran and Hadith. They stress giving the children a good knowledge of the Quran and acquainting them with its various readings more than anything else. So here is referring to the Sabah Ashara Qiraat. There's 7 to 10 different ways of reciting the Quran. Okay, we still study that today. So for instance, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin, Maliki Yawmiddin, Ihdina as-Sirat al-Mustaqim, Ihdina az-Zirat al-Mustaqim, Anamta alayhim, Anamta alayhum, alayhimu. So there's different ways of reciting, which does not change the meaning, but it's a different dialect. So they were quite famous for that. Next, they stress handwriting. And yes, what he says, he's kind of observing them, and what he's saying is, the reason why Ifriqiya is doing better than Morocco is because when the Muslims were being thrown out of Spain, many of the shuyukh, they came and settled in Ifriqiya. So they brought that method from Ifriqiya with them. It was a copy and paste almost. And I'll show you how that's what's happening here, but it's coming from India and Pakistan and Bangladesh. But the question is that relevant for our children? Okay. Lastly, the people of the East, as far as we know, likewise have a mixed curriculum. is kind of mixed. Okay? They're concerned with teaching the Quran, that's at the forefront. Okay? Also, they do not combine Quran with handwriting. You've got to learn that somewhere else separately. You might have to hire a tutor for that. They have special rules for teaching it, and they have their own methods of doing it. So he's looking at it, he's not going in depth, but he's talking about different methods. And lastly, children's slates on which they practice exhibit an inferior form of handwriting. Those who want to learn a good way of handwriting may do so later. So can you see? Because it's not part of their curriculum, it's not part of their mainstream curriculum, therefore they have to learn it later. And he talks about the bad handwriting the students in the East have. Anyway, one last thought from someone called Ibn Arabi. I'm looking at it from his understanding on pedagogy. He says, how thoughtless are our people in that they teach children the Quran when they are first starting out. They read things they do not understand and work hard at something that is not as important for them as other matters. He is now looking at, and this is from Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddimah as well, that he's a very great scholar. He is now being critical of the system at that time. Now, what I wanted to talk about was us here now. It's first time Muslims have come back into the West. Okay? And I don't want to go into the whole academic debate of what do we mean by the West. Right? Is it a geography? Is it an ideology? Because what is the West? Because even Australia is seen as Western, right? And so is America. So what is it a geographical thing? Don't want to go into that debate, but let's talk about Europe. Muslims were here before. We looked at what they had to do. Could you see the difference between Al-Andalus and the rest of the Muslim countries? Because Al-Andalus had a problem. They were amongst the non-Muslims at the time, and they had to keep that game up. Okay? Now, are we to adapt? Now, what's happening here? When we came over from, or our parents or grandparents came over from India, Pakistan, and I remember I wrote a thesis on this, and I said that alongside, and especially from India, alongside the papadoms and the samosas, we brought with us our madrasas. Okay? Now the question is that the right way forward? And that's the question that we as Fatima Elizabeth Cates Academy are constantly asking ourselves, parents, the teachers, and we're trying to do things that is more relevant for the students. What is important for the students? And that's why I've said that our madrasa is not just a madrasa as such where children come and learn and go. It is an experiment, it is a lab in that sense. And we're all part of this experiment.